John Kennedy Jr. beautifully illustrated this by having Drew Barrymore featured on one of his covers, dressed as Marilyn Monroe. Hi everyone, and welcome back to the George Collection. My name is Rachel with Right Side Blonde. I'm very excited today to share with you the JFK cover from August 2000. There's a lot going on this cover. Everything is black and white except for the red George. Had to wear my red today. Red comes to 27, which also comes to code, and it comes to JFK, so why wouldn't they use red for the George on this cover? To me, this is one of the most telling and interesting covers because of this question: who will make us proud again? When I hear the phrase, who will make us proud again, it sounds like make America great again. And we know from experience that Donald Trump uses that phrase, we will make America strong again. We will make America proud again. Is Donald Trump nodding to this cover of George every time he says that?
We will make America powerful again. We will make America wealthy again. We will make America strong again. We will make America proud again. Proud, proud, proud.
Charles Harrelson is now deceased, but this is some more information about his connection to JFK. In September 1980, Harrelson surrendered to police after a 6-hour standoff in which he was reportedly high on cocaine. During the standoff, he threatened suicide and stated that he had killed both Judge Wood and President John F. Kennedy. In a television interview after his arrest, Harrelson said, "At the same time I said I had killed the judge, I said I had killed Kennedy," which might give you an idea to the state of my mind at the time.
Harrelson found himself in a standoff with the police for 6 long hours, threatening suicide the entire time. And as officers trained their guns in his direction, Harrelson admitted to the killing of the judge, as well as John F. Kennedy, interestingly enough. At one point, he even tossed a note out of his car that read, "Since death is certain, I should only be credited with speeding up a natural process. My marker should read, he did his best for ZPG, zero population growth."
He said that the statements made during the standoff were, quote, "an effort to elongate my life." Joseph Chagra later testified during Harrelson's trial that Harrelson claimed to have shot Kennedy and drew maps to show where he was hiding during the assassination. Chagra said that he did not believe Harrelson's claim, and the AP reported that the FBI apparently discounted any involvement by Harrelson in the Kennedy assassination. According to Jim Marr's 1989 book Crossfire, Harrelson is believed to be the youngest and tallest of the 3 tramps by many conspiracy theorists. Mars stated that Harrelson was involved with criminals connected to intelligence agencies and the military, and suggested that he was connected to Jack Ruby through Russell Douglas Matthews, a third party with links to organized crime who was known to both Harrelson and Ruby. Lois Gibson, a well-known forensic artist, matched photographs of Harrelson to the photographs of the youngest looking of the 3 tramps. In 1982, Harrelson told a Dallas TV station, "Do you believe that Lee Harvey Oswald killed President Kennedy alone, without any aid from a rogue agency of the United States government, or at least a portion of that agency?" I believe you are very naive if you do.
You said once that you thought that your father was a CIA operative. Yes?
Yeah, he was.
How do you know? What proof?
See, I shouldn't get into this right now.
Okay.
This is where we're going to get into trouble.
But this is something that you feel and that you're trying to work on?
Oh, I know it's true, but, yeah.
Does it make a difference?
That he was trained by the CIA?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I think it makes a difference. Yeah.
So why would John Kennedy Jr. put the son of an alleged accomplice to his father's assassination on the cover of one of his magazines? December 1996 to be exact. Why would he be wearing angel wings? I'm sure John had heard of the connection between Charles Harrelson and his father's assassination. So it does make it very interesting that he would choose to put an actor, the son of Charles Harrelson, on the cover of his magazine with angel wings. Hi everyone, and welcome back to the George Collection. I'm Rachel, Right Side Blonde. I've always wondered why John Kennedy put Richard Nixon on the first anniversary cover of George. That would be in October of 1996. And after watching a recent video that Tucker Carlson did covering Richard Nixon, I think maybe now I have my answer.
So if you want to understand, if you really want to understand how the American government actually works at the highest levels, and if you want to know why they don't teach history anymore, One thing you should know is that the most popular president in American history was Richard Nixon. Richard Nixon. Yet somehow, without a single vote being cast by a single American voter, Richard Nixon was kicked out of office and replaced by the only unelected president in American history. So we went from the most popular president to a president nobody voted for. Wait a minute, you may ask. Why didn't I know that? Wasn't Richard Nixon a criminal? Wasn't he despised by all decent people? No, he wasn't. In fact, if any president could claim to be the people's choice, it was Richard Nixon. Richard Nixon was re-elected in 1972 by the largest margin of the popular vote ever recorded before or since. Nixon got 17 million more votes than his opponent. Less than 2 years later, he was gone. He was forced to resign, and in his place, an obedient servant of the federal agencies called Gerald Ford took over the White House. How did that happen? Well, it's a long story, but here are the highlights, and they tell you a lot. Richard Nixon believed that elements in the federal bureaucracy were working to undermine the American system of government, and had been doing that for a long time. He often said that. He was absolutely right. On June 23, 1972, Nixon met with the then CIA Director Richard Helms at the White House. During the conversation, which thankfully was tape recorded, Nixon suggested he knew, quote, who shot John, meaning President John F. Kennedy. Nixon further implied that the CIA was directly involved in Kennedy's assassination, which we now know it was. Helms' telling response? Total silence.
One of the sad duties I had was to serve as a member of the Warren Commission. John asks, and this is where it gets interesting, why do you think you were chosen to serve on the commission? I understand former Defense Secretary Bob McNamara recommended me. President Johnson called me. I think it was on a Sunday night after your father was assassinated. And Lyndon said, I want you to serve on this bipartisan group. I said, I've got all these responsibilities in the House, and really, I can't do it. Lyndon said, you have to. I'm going to twist your arm until you do. So I said I would. John said, you wrote a book some years later, right? And Gerald Ford said, I wrote a book called Portrait of the Assassin. John said, was the book in response to all of the conjecture? And Ford said this, I am a firm believer today, as I was previously, rigidly, that Lee Harvey Oswald committed the assassination. Our commission found no evidence of a conspiracy, foreign or domestic. I feel very strongly about it. I regret people like Oliver Stone and conspiracy theorist Mark Lane and the others who have made a buck out of a tragedy of American history. I try to defend what the commission did. I'm the only one from the commission who's still around today. I really resent what a lot of the press have done in this area too, because the truth is, John, there is no new significant evidence that's been produced. There have been different interpretations of the basic evidence, but there's no doubt in my mind that Lee Harvey Oswald committed the assassination. When your father was president, I was commander-in-chief, and I had to very carefully research his thoughts and policies. I originally believed that his plan was to use military strength to help the Saigon government stop the communist movement. But now, by way of historical documents, I have learned that sometime later President Kennedy had rethought this and didn't want to support that regime in Saigon. He wanted the United States to be involved in the Vietnam War only to a certain extent. If that unfortunate event, the death of your father, had not taken place, things would have been somewhat different, not as they were under Johnson and Nixon. As we were leaving the dining room with the cigars we had received as gifts, Castro abruptly stopped walking. You know, Lee Harvey Oswald was trying to come here, he said, half a question, half declaration. In October 1963, Oswald had applied for a visa at the Cuban embassy in Mexico City, but his request had been denied. Yes, I did know that, John replied. Castro paused, then said, it was a difficult time, and you know, we didn't let many Americans into Cuba. Yes. Castro lifted his head and walked on. This short exchange is a riddle of sorts, and exactly what Castro meant is impossible to say. But immediately after he heard John's last answer, a sense of relief washed over his face. Maybe he was offering a veiled apology. He knew that if Oswald had been allowed into Cuba in October 1963, then he might not have been in Dallas a month later. Sitting on the Mexicana flight back to New York, I mentioned the possibility to John. He thought about it for a few moments, nodded, and then said nothing. I've covered JFK Jr.'s editor's letter in this issue before, but I wanted to dive back into this magazine since a lot of people are talking about it, and it's a very interesting article that I think everyone should hear and know about. Before I dive into the article, I want to read this one part of the editor's letter that JFK Jr. addresses that particular article. It says, "On another more sober note in this issue is the first-person account of Gela Amir, the mother of Yigal Amir, the convicted assassin of Yitzhak Rabin. She describes the strange events surrounding the death of Israel's prime minister. Several months ago, representatives of the family contacted the editors at George and asked whether we were interested in the piece. They were, no doubt, hoping that my own family history would bring added attention to their story, and they were probably right. For several months, we weighed the wisdom of running the piece, utilizing the services of Linda Gradstein, a national public radio reporter based in Jerusalem, to vet it. Much of the information is interpretive and clearly the view of an anguished mother and a staunch right-winger. In no way is it intended to be an objective examination of the events surrounding the assassination. It is, however, a compelling look at one facet of an insular, conservative religious community within Israel. It may raise interesting questions. It may not. Either way, the central tragedy remains. Rabin is dead, and the history of Israel has been changed forever. Let us know what you think. John Kennedy." As the Ides of October come round, George marks its second year on newsstands, while the Central Intelligence Agency celebrates 50 years in the Sneaky Pete business. Perhaps some forced and humorless comparison between us and them might be in order, but it would probably inspire you to do something with this all-star issue other than read it. Maybe wrap a fish in it or roll it up and spank your dog. And then you would never learn about some fascinating secrets and scandals from the past 50 years of the CIA. The agency was founded just after World War II, when it became clear that the U.S. lacked the means to fight the new Cold War that had broken out with the Soviet Union. The huge but dormant war machine the U.S. had developed in the post-war years was ill-suited to this new kind of engagement. Given the kind of government he ran, Soviet leader Joseph Stalin had a distinct advantage over the earnest Americans when it came to gathering intelligence clandestinely. 50 years later, the CIA is struggling to adapt to a post-Cold War world. Pecking around for secrets at embassy functions doesn't seem to reap the rewards it used to. Satellites now gather much of the surveillance, and the grand mission of the agency remains largely undefined. The public is left instead with such unsettling images of our grand agency as those revealed in the recent campaign finance hearings. Senior agency officials confessed that they spent hours providing 37 separate confidential briefings to a mid-level Department of Commerce official named John Huang. Such is the Cold War in a global economy. But don't fall for the easy trap of cynicism. The CIA isn't set up to do slick PR, and its mission isn't warm and fuzzy.
Cindy Crawford on the cover and a lot of big-name advertisers inside. A very big launch in no small part because John F. Kennedy Jr. is editor-in-chief.
Of this extraordinary magazine, George, which is a hoot of a magazine. I thought you were a lawyer.
I was.
What happened?
Well, we decided, actually taking a cue from folks like yourself and you around the 1992 election, that there was an opportunity here to change the definition of a political magazine. Certainly the way Americans were accessing information about politics and politicians was changing. Candidates were appearing on late night talk shows, on talk radio, on sitcoms, and there was a kind of a leveling process, and while the rest of media clearly had caught up with that, we felt that political magazines per se hadn't.
Your mother was a hell of an editor at Doubleday.
That's what I hear.
Would she have liked George?
I think she would have.